You're listening to Cannabis Market Insights with your host, Jason Keehn.
Hi, everybody. You're tuned in to the second in our Cannabis Market Insights podcast series. My name is Jason Keehn, and these podcasts are affiliated with Infocast line of Canna Compliance Summits. And in this series, we'll be interviewing various industry leaders, activists, investors, policymakers, regulators, and miscellaneous stakeholders, and getting juicy knowledge drops for you from all of these interesting assorted cannabis characters. Today, we've got a bit of a deep dive, a technical deep dive. You might want to get your notepad out here for this one. We're going to be talking to Taylor Trah, who's Formulation Manager at OutCo in San Diego. Taylor has a neuroscience background and is managing a lot of the medically oriented products that OutCo produces. So, yeah, we got a bit geeky in this talk, and it's pretty fascinating, so I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. How about yourself?
All right. So, yeah, so this is the second one of these sort of interviews destined for a podcast on a new section of our site. And I just, I haven't actually, I've seen your colleague Marcus in action at our last Canna West meeting, and I know Allison has spoken at one or two of our things, or she's been a regular on our invite list at a minimum, but I'm pretty sure she's spoken at least one of them, but I haven't really had a chance to hang out with either of those guys one-on-one, but I'm super happy to talk to you. Also, especially once I kind of glanced at your bio on LinkedIn, saw you had a BA in neuroscience at US. I don't know if it was from UCSD, but you also worked at the UCSD health system, right?
Right. So my degree's from USD, the private liberal arts school here in San Diego.
Okay, right.
But as part of that program, I was required to do research. It was a brand new program, and the university didn't yet have a neuroscience program or a department. So I went outside the school to find research at UC San Diego, looking at adolescent substance use and brain development through structural and functional MRI, which was beyond the capacity of a liberal arts university.
Right.
And that ultimately led to work with that project post-graduation.
Cool.
Yeah.
So were you, I'm assuming that you already had a general interest in, shall we say, altered states of consciousness and the plant?
Definitely. Well, so
it's safe to incriminate yourself now, right?
No, yeah.
Post facto.
I think it's safe these days.
Yeah.
So, my story with substance use goes back a long way to the point where I was the president of my high school's student organization for drug and alcohol awareness.
There we go.
A choice that I made at a time when I had not used any substances and was interested in the brain and its development. And I thought ultimately that it was best for a young person to go through that development without altering its course in any way. And as I continued to do research on substance use and different substances through a variety of channels, ultimately the decision that I came to was that cannabis seemed like, as I matured and felt like my brain was at a point where I could handle it, that cannabis was a substance that I thought could actually benefit my life rather than, harm my neurodevelopment. And so I experimented with cannabis a little bit personally, and that led to pursuing neuroscience. And when an opportunity arose that I could actually look at, substances of intoxication and their effect on the brain through a much closer, lens, I took that opportunity through my studies in university, and it's just kind of progressed from there. Being able to take my postgraduate work and look at what these substances were doing in the body was extremely interesting to me, and then that led me to a point of wanting to get my hands on these substances and do research in that way. And being part of academia and the current legislative surroundings of doing work with cannabis, it made more sense for me to transition out of the academic setting and into the medical cannabis marketplace. And so that's how I found myself at OutCo ultimately.
Interesting. That's a really different and kind of cool story, actually. But personal trajectory.
It's a winding road, and I feel like you never know where it's going to take you.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because I mean, often what you find when you talk to the people in cannabis who seem like they're kind of really the most engaged, or they're kind of like the kind of, I don't want to say sort of kind of leaders in a way. Almost everybody has some personal story, not just about their own use, but either about a medical condition or somebody that they're really close to, And it seems like there's sort of a kind of a threshold where, yeah, the people that are most committed and really like the flag bearers, so to speak, are almost uniformly have some strong connection just beyond recreational use. I don't know if you have that perception.
I think that's probably an accurate perception.
Yeah.
I think the experience that you can have watching a loved one have improvement in their life through use of a substance that you've been told potentially is bad and has no medicinal value is extremely powerful. In my case, observing pre-Parkinsonian relation experience cease in their tremors after consuming cannabis is just a really profound experience when they don't respond to other medicines, and they can have immediate improvement in their quality of life through use of this molecule.
Is that something that you anecdote? Is that something you saw since you started OutCo, or was that before you signed up?
That was prior to starting with OutCo.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So there you go. Case in point. So I had a few sort of a sequence of questions, but I did a little bit of background research since I haven't been in San Diego much lately, and I haven't been to any of the OutCo retail outlets. So I dredged up an article on you guys from a while back, and towards the end there were a couple pieces of information I thought were really good hooks. So it cited this study where you guys commissioned Monocle Research to do a 2,000 person survey, essentially. And then that was also tied to the general strategy that you guys are oriented not so much to the existing, stoner connoisseur crowd, but what somebody in the article called the next customer, quote unquote. So do you want to? I think that might be an interesting jumping off point, because that kind of blends the geeky stuff with this sort of, you guys' long range kind of vision, right?
Certainly. So we here at OutCo definitely are believers in the medical application of this plant, and being in the area that we're in of San Diego County, we're actually still only licensed for medical production because of how regulations ended up breaking out and all of that. It means that our medical products have no problem crossing over into the recreational side of things. But ultimately, that is of peak interest for us, is creating products that are going to improve the lives of our users. And part of what drives that is having fostered a scientific team here that we feel like is, leading the way in the industry, under the direction of Dr. Marcus Rogan in our extraction department and Dr. Allison Justice in our cultivation department. We really feel like, gathering this data through rigorous scientific methods and using the information that, informs to make choices that are offering better products onto the market. And so along the way, that's led to our interest in our older demographic here. So we're in a part of San Diego County, the unincorporated part of San Diego County, out east here, where our demographic tends to be over the age of 56, actually, for our medical dispensary. And so that's led us towards proclivity for designing products that are targeted at that older user, both through educational initiatives, so getting those older users who are less well informed about, perhaps all of the cutting edge cannabis science that's currently happening, and informing them how they can apply that science to live a better life. So one of our interests is topical preparation, and we've had our older patients have great experiences with that, relieving arthritic type pain in joints, and increasing mobility that they've suffered from a diminishing quality of, and that brings back, things that they enjoy doing in their lives. Other points along the route, we saw in that research a developing market of basically the soccer mom. So, your casual after work user in the female demographic. And so creating products tailored towards that introduction in, for example, an oral preparation like a tincture, instead of going down the route of edibles where there's that uncertainty in your dose and everybody is aware of, at least a friend who's had the experience of becoming over-medicated from taking an oral preparation through an edible, and whether you blame that, experience on a lack of homogeneity in the product that was purchased, for example, the full dose being in one corner of the cookie and eating the other half of the cookie and having no psychoactive experience, and then, reasoning, oh, I can eat the other half of the cookie and have a similar experience and getting 10 times the experience that you got before. We want to help people who are new to the market avoid those sorts of scenarios. So instead, we're going to offer products where we apply our scientific understanding of, this plant and of formulations to offer a known concentration with homogeneous distribution throughout the product and an easy way to dose it. So in our case, we offer a MCT coconut oil-based tincture with 40 milligrams of, our cannabinoids of interest, whether that be CBD or THC, per milliliter of solution, and that allows patients to drop about 1 milligram per drop, so that they have, extremely precise control over the orally administered dose that they're going to experience, and that way they can find the right dose for them.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah, this is definitely, I've been doing a lot of tracking of these demographics, and, definitely interesting, irrespective of, the marketing expectations, and this is kind of opening up whole new chunks of, expansion for cannabis products. It's definitely, the data is starting to pile up out there. It's just not well kind of known and well organized. The scientific studies, there are enough. According to, there was this huge review study under the National Academy of Sciences, NAS, that came out earlier this year, which was still, I'm not a total expert in this area, just a sort of reader of the papers, but even that seemed really wishy-washy. Like, they said, yeah, okay, there are some benefits. There's still all these other, drawbacks we got to keep looking at, blah, blah, blah. But,
I think that's an important point. Cannabis shouldn't be characterized as a panacea. It's not. It might have the ability to help with many different facets of life that, could be improved for different people, but that's not without consideration of potential drawbacks. And so seeing studies that are, honest in presenting that, I think is important. But unfortunately, in the past, the studies that have been conducted haven't been honest in their reporting, and they've largely skewed towards that negative side of things. So it's great now to see those negative drawbacks or, potential side effects balanced with, how this cannabis can be used productively for improvement of life circumstances.
And then there's many different ways that, improvement of life circumstances breaks down or branches out.
Absolutely.
That will get qualified over, going forwards the next decade or whatever, or two. So you're in charge of the formulation activities there, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Currently. So that means you're kind of overseeing the use of a bunch of extraction machines. I'm just trying to visualize this, kind of guessing here. You've probably got a lab within a kitchen, and you're looking at the different kind of infused product SOPs and the ideas for how to create, the infused products like the ones you were just describing. Maybe just sketch out for us a little bit more what your average day looks like, actually, just kind of like anecdotally.
Sure. So our department actually breaks down into two sides, sort of, all under the direction of Dr. Rogan. The extraction and the formulation are kind of our two facets. So raw plant material gets loaded or milled and then loaded into a supercritical CO2 extractor, and all of the extraction apparatus and the handling of the plant material is done by my colleague Blake Grauerholz and his team. So they load the extractor vessel under a high temperature and pressure. CO2 is put into a state such that it has very unique solubility characteristics with the molecules that we're interested in the cannabis plant. And so under a lower temperature and pressure, we're able to pull terpenes. Those are going to be the smell of the cannabis plant, and all of that, kind of smell and flavor that you're going to associate with the different cultivars that are present in cannabis. From there, we'll raise the temperature and pressure on that whole plant cannabis starting material and extract heavier molecules, being our cannabinoids, including THC, CBD, and all of the other minor cannabinoids that research is just starting to inform our understanding of. Even though we don't fully understand all of the minor cannabinoids that are present in the cannabis plant, something that's been important to the optimization of our supercritical CO2 extraction process here at OutCo is maintaining that full minor cannabinoid profile from the plant in our extracts.
And those
so we're able to...
Okay, just go ahead. Little parenthesis. So, and those are usually like under what 1%. For each of those
correct.
minor, trace, they're kind of trace, amounts. Yeah.
So those trace amounts, despite our lack of understanding of what exactly they might do, are continually being implicated in contributing to the nuanced effects that are different amongst different cultivars of cannabis, right? And so it's very important for us to maintain those trace signatures of the cultivar in our finished extracts that we offer from OutCo and our other brands. And we're able to do that through a very careful optimization of that supercritical CO2 process that was conducted, paying very close attention to the data that we gathered and using typical science techniques. Star factorial design of experiment was conducted, basically look at the upper and lower threshold limits of the parameters that the machine was capable of producing extracts under, and allowing a data-driven approach to select the appropriate conditions that are great for running the machine day in and day out. We've also optimized that unit for time. So we need to be able to pull extract from that unit every day. And so one of the considerations that we took into that design of experiment was being able to turn the machine over every day. So we run a 22-hour runtime with 2 hours downtime in the middle to get the machine broken down, pull the extract out of it, load it up for its next run. So all of those factors, how to get the most out of your material, how to get the most material out of your day, come into play when, figuring out the best way to go about this. But largely that's not my responsibility. I take the raw extracts from Blake in the extraction department, and they become my responsibility from that point. So what I get are terpene fraction co-extracted with water, as well as a cannabinoid fraction and its co-extracted water. And our process for the refinement of those two fractions is very minimal. We're simply going to remove the co-extracted water from those fractions, and those are going to be ready for formulation from there. So the terpenes can be brought back together with that cannabinoid portion in order to create full-flavored vaporizer cartridges that only draw their flavor and effect from cannabis-derived terpenes. No other additives are introduced in that process. So we're just bringing back that cannabinoid fraction with all of the minor cannabinoids that we've retained through not doing any post-processing like winterization or distillation. Distillation, again, for everybody, is a process going to target a single molecule in that cannabis extract and aim to leave that behind. And so what that will allow you to do is produce an extract that is, greater than 90% delta 9 THC, but what that does is ignore the fact that research is pointing towards the importance of all of those minor cannabinoids and other molecules that are being extracted, and you're removing them from that extract.
Well, okay, great.
So,
Thanks. This is okay. Very concrete. Well, okay. So you've got two. So they don't come out as oils; they come out in a water solution, and then
they are oils. They actually separate from the water. So
because cannabinoids are hydrophobic, right?
That is correct.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah, so they don't mix with the water, and that's what allows us to separate that water off without any solvent processing or things like that. So when we want that full flavor, we'll bring that terpene component back together with the cannabinoid fraction, rehomogenize that, and offer that as a vaporizer cartridge, again, with no additional sources of flavor or thinners to make it perform in a vaporizer cartridge. We believe in just offering the full constituents of the cannabis plant without plant material effectively. In other products, we can leave out that terpene component to minimize cannabis flavor and odor while still taking advantage of the minor cannabinoids that are present in that full spectrum CO2 cannabinoid fraction. So, for example, we can infuse that cannabinoid fraction into a MCT coconut oil, like I've mentioned previously, for delivery as a tincture, which is going to allow precise oral administration of a known concentration of cannabinoid. And we can play with the ratios there, tailoring CBD and THC contents of that finished product for the end user. We can also minimize odor in topical preparations by excluding the terpenes from that preparation so that you don't walk into a room smelling like a freshly opened bag of cannabis, but instead preferring essential oils. Yeah, exactly. So we'll substitute, the cannabis essential oils, those terpenes, for other sources like lavender essential oil, eucalyptus, tea tree oil, a little bit of vitamin E for skin softening, and offer that as a topical preparation.
Well, okay, so you have a pretty wide suite of infused products.
We do, yeah. I mean, so a large portion of my day will consist of readying extracts for infusion into those products, as well as formulating them in large batches. I
was just going to ask a dumb question. Are people lumping tinctures in with infused products? Is that or is there sort of a blurriness or
because of the unique regulatory framework of San Diego County.
Not even California, just San Diego County now.
No, that's correct. So OutCo operates in a unique capacity in that we were allowed to be in production by the San Diego County Sheriff and all of San Diego County supervisors prior to the going rec in 2018, right? And so
Prop 64,
that's
right.
Exactly. Or even well pre-Prop 64.
Whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so because we were operating prior to all of the regulations that govern the entire state now, we were subject to regulations that were effectively enforced just by the San Diego County Sheriff. And what that meant for us was an ability to cultivate here on site, extract, manufacture, and distribute through our medical dispensary. But what we weren't allowed to do was offer any infused food or beverage products. There was a greater concern on their behalf that food or beverage products infused with cannabis were more likely to end up in the hands of underage users, and the consequences that come with that. You don't want anybody not intending to get high to get high, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't manufacture still to this day any food or beverage products, despite our micro-business licensure that would typically permit that. So instead we offer an orally administrable preparation, being the tincture, that's also usable as a topical and doesn't fall into the category of the food or beverage products because it's very clearly medicinal in its application, being just a dropper bottle, no
Yeah.
food or
Got it.
beverage branding,
Got it.
shapes, colors, flavors,
Yeah.
anything like that. So
you're
I guess
both.
that's kind of an interesting
It
point.
is, because you're kind of squeezed in one way, but it's helped you focus and target a very
It really
specific
has. I think
demographic.
that's certainly worth paying attention to, that we were squeezed out of, food or beverage by that, but part of the, greater regulation that we faced has forced innovation here. Additionally, CO2
Exactly.
extraction should be mentioned. Prior to the extraction department getting up and running here, it was intended that our extraction be done with ethanol. But the San Diego County Sheriff determined that because of the flammable nature of ethanol, even though it's not volatile according to, the state regulations, ethanol was too volatile for us to use here at OutCo. And so that pushed us towards using CO2 extraction for just about everything here. And what that led to was tremendous amount of innovation in refining that process to be able to do things that people said you really couldn't do with CO2. I, to be totally honest, was not a big believer in the capacity of CO2 to produce a palatable extract prior to our optimization of the system. And I can say with 100% confidence that applying science to these systems has completely changed my opinion of what is possible with this methodology.
Wow, super cool. I mean, definitely, CO2 definitely is getting a lot of airtime in the cannabis media and the shows and stuff like that. But so this was already I'm imagining you must have been using it for at least 3 years or so now, right, or more, or.
OutCo has been extracting here for 2 years. The dispensary is the longest continually operating in San Diego County, going on 4 years now, I believe. The extraction here, I believe, started in September about 2 years ago. And again, the extraction equipment for ethanol was around and ready to be used until regulation said we could not. And at that point, a pivot was made towards supercritical CO2, and supercritical CO2 processing has come a long way, in large part due to scientists applying good science to figuring out these systems. Honestly, CO2 is not the best solvent for cannabinoids, in that it's not easy to get cannabinoids soluble in CO2. What you need is a tremendous understanding of the system and the chemistry of these molecules to be able to pull with CO2 the molecules that you're interested in. And what that ultimately leads to is a greater specificity in the extraction process that has led us to be able to create the products that we do.
So it takes a lot of finesse and technical chops, but what you get on the other side is a lot more options, basically, and a super high, like retaining like the full suite of the minor cannabinoids, and then you can do a lot of things with that.
Exactly. It was thought that CO2 extraction was only really good for making crude extracts that would be distilled and refined previously. And I think the work that's been done here and is, making its way out into the industry at large is showing that CO2 with an appropriate understanding of the solvent can be used to make exceptionally high quality extracts.
Okay, so that's kind of like a glimpse into the sort of the back office, the production world you guys have there. So since you have this, you're doing all this technical stuff and you have this neuroscience background, I thought this question about how to describe the effects, the relationship between the strains and the sort of rough perception of the typical effects for certain strains. I talked to Andrew D'Angelo the other day, and he called it, we need a new operating system. A lot of people are dispensing with the old sativa indica kind of whatever duality, or that was just a kind of a rule of thumb sort of thing that people used in the old days. Do you guys have any thought or work on like I'm not quite sure how to articulate it, but it's like, well, it's like what I said.
I understand.
Incandescent has one approach, a very simple approach. They're trying to simply say, hey, this product is this kind of an effect? In a very crude, they have like a one-word label for it, and they have like 5 or 6 things that are all kind of like have a different vibe, but I don't know that they go into the details on the the ratios, the profile ratios and all that. But I mean, it seems this is kind of geeky on the one hand, but it's like a really important aspect of the whole marketing of cannabis to a much larger world now, right?
Definitely, I agree. With the incredibly wide-ranging effects that you can experience from using cannabis between, from one cultivar to the next, it's not a surprise that people want to know how something that they ingest is going to make them feel.
Exactly.
Why would anybody be surprised by that consumer desire? Unfortunately, indica, sativa, and hybrid really don't do a good job at offering any kind of usable insight into how a product's going to make a consumer feel. So that is something that the science team here at OutCo would love to see the industry as a whole move away from, and it has been great to see progress in that direction. Unfortunately, the science to support a great alternative system is still in the works. That said, I think you do see the start of those sorts of classification systems through work that certain individuals or groups are doing. You already mentioned Candescent, and that's a branding effort that's putting together an understanding of the experiential effects that these cultivars are going to have.
With, branding,
getting them into a patient's hands. But that's a great step in the right direction. And I think we'll see those efforts guided largely by increased analytical capacity for the cannabis plant. So a problem that we have right now is that there's over 140 cannabinoids identified being produced in the cannabis plant, right? And analytical labs that are PCC certified are testing for 10 or 12 of those cannabinoids. So we're just basically in a really enormous cave with a small candle, bumbling around, but analytical capacity sheds light into that environment that we're working in, and the ability to analyze the plant and figure out what other molecules are being produced by these different cultivars is of peak importance to being able to shed any more light into the effects that these different cultivars are going to have on people.
Right. So okay, I have a thought there, but just finish your thought.
Certainly. So with the greater analytical capacity that's come just in the past number of years with BCC regulated testing and more samples going through analytical labs, other groups have started to put forth basically terpene superclasses. I believe the work is done by Justin Fischedick and his group out of the Netherlands. And terpene superclasses. Nice. Yeah, look into it. Okay. So what that suggests, or that work suggests, is that looking at the major terpene constituent of different cultivars might shed more light on its relative effects in consumers than indica, sativa, hybrid variations. And they do a pretty great job with a scatter plot of showing how these terpene contents of different cultivars correspond with frequency of reporting of different effects. I actually just had another paper shared with me that hasn't yet been published, but its abstract was just put out in the it's a neuroscience journal. I have a computer in front. Frontiers in Neuroscience. Cannabis and the Anxiety of Fragmentation. Everybody should check it out. Keep an eye out for that paper being published in full.
Okay, cannabis or cannabis in the anxiety of fragmentation?
Cannabis and the anxiety of fragmentation. That's the short title. It's got a subtitle. And you'll find it in Frontiers in Neuroscience, being published soon. It was put out by Whistler Therapeutics Group, and what they're suggesting in that paper is that different major terpene contents have significant correlations with differences in anxiolytic activity. So, as everybody knows, some cultivars are going to provoke anxiety while other cultivars are going to suppress anxiety, and
Yep.
people with anxiety have very unpleasant experiences having found those strains that provoke anxiety
Yep.
rather than calm the anxiety that they hoped it would, do for them. So these are, papers that are being published right now, and those
So
are
these
is what's going to lend us that ability to know how this cannabis is going to affect each individual.
and so both of these are focusing on the terpene crowd, so to speak, and not even the minor full cannabinoids, because I was just going to make a couple of comments there. So I've been somewhat tracking, with the cannabinoids, which is where the brunt of the biomedical research focus has been, like the interaction with the endocannabinoid system, the receptor sites and all that jazz. The problem with those like under 1% trace cannabinoids is that, there's hardly even enough of it produced for researchers to take those one by one and do kind of like lower level, tests on like, cells and critters and stuff like that.
Sure.
Before, and so now we've got a handful of companies that are coming out of the woodwork or been floating around and just sort of, getting going, getting some publicity, who are taking this sort of biotech fermentation approach to, use some kind of microbe to produce specific, through genetic engineering, produce specific trace cannabinoids at much higher rates, so that people can actually have something to work with and study, let alone beyond that then market, if they can produce it in commercial bulk. But right now there's not even enough of some of these trace cannabinoids for people to even do low level, very fine-tuned research, right?
Certainly. Yeah. So breeding cannabis cultivars to produce greater amounts of minor cannabinoids has been how we got there up until this point.
Right.
But genetic modification through CRISPR has been put forth as a possible method for achieving cannabis that only produces CBG through THC synthase knockouts.
Right.
Ebu Labs gave an interesting presentation at the Cannabis Science Conference on what they believe to be work that will put some of these sorts of plans into action in the coming year. There's been so many limitations to research, whether it be regulatory hurdles to jump through or just the availability of biomass. Again, likely because of regulatory hurdles, but still, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah, and I personally, I've followed the whole biotech, GMO thing for a long time. I'm sort of more as a sort of skeptic or critic, for the most part. But it sort of intrigues me that I don't know how much time and just to do the plant cross pollination the traditional way to pull up the percentage of these smaller cannabinoids could just take a long time, right?
Impossibly long amounts of time. That make it ultimately just not feasible to get this work done for any individual, right? They're now looking towards methods that, even if they're not largely applicable towards production, perhaps they can at least shed some light onto what we're working with here. And I think that single molecule approach that's common in traditional pharma meets its match in cannabis potentially. There's such incredible complexity, and we are already starting to see that some of that complexity is contributed to by synergy between different molecules, even different classes of molecules. So terpenes binding to cannabinoid receptors, that's just beyond what people would think to investigate without looking at the whole plant and its effects it together in order to even have an idea that they should be looking there.
Yeah, it completely boggles the traditional, biomedical pharma approach, ultimately.
Absolutely, which is why I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. It's super exciting. It's kind of a scientific Wild West, but with with a lot of immediate, tangible results, and that just it so expands the conversation beyond just kind of a stoner pot, basically.
With how little understanding we have of this plant and the systems in the body with which it interacts, the potential for discovery as we learn more about the system and the plant is, limitless. What it could, tie into and shed light on is spectacular.
Totally. No question. And it's yeah. So we're about we're on going on like almost 40 minutes. Do you want to keep going?
I don't really have any time constraints. I don't know if I'm too long-winded in any of these answers
I think
or what, but whatever helps
actually,
you get something you can put together.
No, this is, I actually, most of these calls right now are kind of trying to, keep it sort of circling around issues with distribution and supply chain. But, everything you said, is the kind of like the infrastructure or a kind of one layer of all of that, because this, okay, so let's just pull away from the technical details for a second and just try to do a wrap up kind of comment here about, so since you guys already anchored in and focus in the medical segment and the kind of, the boomer demographic, seniors, there's a general thing happening here. California has gone adult use. There's different problems with, issues or challenges for strictly medical patients or medical patients that don't have money anyway, let's say. And then there's the issue with the charity donation cannabis, the taxation on medical category. There's the issues around, the how do they call it? How does the BCC call it? The the A track and the M track.
Yeah.
Right. And so they've been making some adjustments through legislation to those, but I guess will the medical strictly, or not, there's no strictly medical with cannabis. Obviously, it has this general therapeutic aspect, so that's not the right way to say it. But for the people that have a strong, overtly medical or narrowly defined medical need for cannabis, are they going to be disfavored by the way the market evolves in California? Let's just put it that way.
Sure. I think I can kind of give a case study to shed some light on that. So having been in operation prior to Prop 64 and then after Prop 64, we've seen an interesting shift in how products make their way to the shelf, right? And ultimately, greater regulation by the BCC leads to safer products for our end consumers. They ensure that no pesticides or residual solvents over, acceptable levels are going to make it into medical products for patients to use. But with that comes a greater burden on producers to maximize batch sizes, and that's done for the reason of expensive compliant testing. So you're looking at a cost to produce a batch of product hovering right around $500 in testing costs after your potency and pesticide and microbial panels are all completed and done. And what that puts in place is a hurdle for small niche products that serve unique medical applications. So I can give a couple examples. One of them being a THC acid formulation for tinctures. So there was a patient seeking a preparation that would not produce any intoxicating effects in any way, but would still present greater efficacy than CBD when administered in isolation. This patient wasn't having any efficacy of CBD by itself, limiting their seizures, but they hoped that administering a full spectrum preparation would have that desired effect. And what they found was that THC acid and minor cannabinoid acid preparation, when used with CBD, actually attenuated their seizure activity. But the typical consumer in the recreational market isn't seeking THC acid because THC acid, when consumed orally, doesn't produce an intoxicating effect. That's
right. It's not
desired
being
goal for our medical application, but because there's no decarboxylation taking place, there's no psychoactivity, and so it doesn't fit on the recreational market. So that's a product that has very low sales volume, and
so there's less incentive,
prohibitive to produce it.
Right, prohibitive.
Exactly.
Okay,
it's really
what I was hoping
you want to be able to help. yeah, you want to be able to help that patient who has that unique medical need, but there's so few of those patients seeking a THC acid-rich tincture that perhaps only one producer can justify making that preparation. And we've seen that with another application that is kind of an uncomfortable one for recreational users to consider. But we were making medicated suppositories for medical patients who suffered from lower GI distress or menstrual pain. And suppositories, rectal administration of a recreational drug isn't very typical in the Western world. So there's not a lot of people coming into your recreational shop looking for a medicated suppository, but those who can benefit from direct application to the lower GI or vaginal systems are looking for that product. And so there's a brand that does a great job with medicated suppositories, Forea, that's gotten a good amount of press surrounding them.
They're
and that's what allows them to continue offering them.
Right, but they're so they're a really niche product. Yeah, they've been doing a kind of brilliant, provocative job of framing the conversation around that. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, they have, and that's been necessary in order to get the larger market to talk about and accept application that has definite medical utility, but might not make it onto the market in this increased regulatory environment otherwise.
So are you saying then, do you know for a fact, are they having trouble, like, is it financially, is it tough for them financially to develop and market that product?
Well, for Forea, their entire brand has been built around sexual health, right? And so that fits their brand. But, for example, here at OutCo, the brand is a lot more mixed and isn't so focused on a single line of, administration. And so for us, offering a suppository that has, for example, a greater dose for greater medical efficacy than, what might be intended for exploration is prohibitive to us because of testing costs and the lack of a market for that product. So as the market matures and individuals become aware that certain folks are offering certain products, that might not be a problem. But I think you see the shift from medical to recreational being both a positive for market proliferation, but also it can have limiting factors on smaller producers, and OutCo isn't a small producer. So when you look at the cottage industry, for example, I think that regulatory issue shines back on it doubly.
Okay, so that's exactly the kind of information I was looking for, like kind of high res granular case examples.
Sure, yeah. I hope I wasn't too long-winded in that one, but
I think that's great.
Those points that we've experienced here personally have been really interesting, and it's interesting to hear you talk about larger market trends and being able to shed light on it from single points that we've seen be both limiting and expansive.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a better sense of how to frame the different layers of this for future our kind of compliance meetings that we do for the East Coast, where there's, a lot of the states are presumably some portion of states are going to only go as far as a medical program for some time, and of course, New York and New Jersey are now about to, tip over from medical to adult use, and Massachusetts already has. So there's this kind of, there might be some of these dynamics over there too.
Yeah, definitely. Any light that you can shed on that when, potential regulators are considering these points, I think it's really important to think about the niche user, somebody who has a problem. A lot of the time, this is the cannabis, the medical cannabis seeker, somebody who has ailment that hasn't been well resolved by traditional offering, and so they seek more specific and uniquely tailored offering, and limiting that potential in the cannabis market takes away that prospective outlet they have for a solution to their ailment.
Right. Okay, I think that's a really good sort of we did a great arc there of conversation. So rather than just well, there's probably other things we could talk about, but I think that's probably fine for now. Do you have any leftover thoughts, just to cover like a kind of wrap up comment, or?
I mean, I feel like we really covered a lot there.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk with you anytime more in depth about any of these individual points in a bit more structured manner.
Okay,
if there's any things that have jogged any interest for you.
Well, okay, just to be geeky here again, is there that research with that Monocle was an outside, a third-party organization? Did you guys summarize that in a paper or an article anywhere, or is that just kind of internal?
No, the Monocle research is very proprietary in that it drives our branding decisions and things of that nature.
Do you have any? Does Marcus? He has a couple papers out, right?
Yeah, Marcus has written tons of articles that are all over the place.
That's right. That's right. There, I've seen him on
the case with
Terpene Testing Mag has profiled him. Right. Okay. Well, if you have
Blake is worth keeping an eye out for too. He started doing some interesting articles on the extraction side of things.
Great. Well, this was a great deep dive more into the kind of the extraction formulation side that is obviously informing. This is the area of the highest growth rate anyway in cannabis segments or categories or whatever applications, right? And of course, famously, the new BCC came out with that statement that the largest category of failures, of testing failures, at 30% were in the infused products category, right?
Right. I'm not at all surprised to see that. A large part of, I think it was like 80% of those failed products or so are failures based on label claims.
Oh, that's right. Thanks for adding that. I forgot. Right. It wasn't so much the
label claims factor in mostly to edibles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So contaminants are a big thing too, and I see contaminants being the biggest concern on edibles. I think for a reason that you mentioned being that there are many other ingredients in a food or beverage product than the cannabis material, and some of those additives are, other agricultural products that don't face the same intense regulation on pesticide use due to their nature as an inhalable product as cannabis does. So you're going to introduce potential contaminant sources there, and many folks don't have the research and development budget to do testing on all of their starting materials, right? So they end up with a finished batch that has contamination of a pesticide coming from a non-cannabis source. But additionally, edibles or, manufactured food and beverage products fall under the regulation of that 10 milligram dose size, and with only a 10% allowed variance from that 10 milligram dose size, you're talking about a single milligram. And so the, wiggle room for that formulation becomes very difficult when you're looking to do such precise formulation, especially when you start considering that many producers are still working in relatively small batch sizes. So, homogeneity becomes a concern, and just so many factors come into play with putting a compliant product out there in this new compliance system.
Yeah, great. Thanks for reminding me that the 80% of that 30% was actually comes to the labeling and the variance and the potency, not the contaminant issues for edibles or infused products.
That's a valid concern too. A major point of contention a lot of people have with orally administered preparations is that they aren't easily dosable, and so having a precise dose like that is really important to moving the industry forward as producing trustworthy products.
Cool. Okay, so thanks so much for your time, Taylor. At OutCo.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, Jason.
All right. We'll be in touch.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up with our interview with Taylor Trah, Formulation Manager at OutCo /Outliers Collective. Really appreciate Taylor taking that 40 some minutes out of his day, and hope you found that as interesting as I did. Thanks so much for listening in. Tune in next time for another blazing installment of the Cannabis Market Insights series. Take care for now.